Hi, I'm Riz Khan in London. In this episode of my show, I've spanned the Atlantic to hear two different perspectives on the conflict in Gaza. Aviv Ezra is Israel's Acting Consul General in New York, the largest Israeli consulate in the US. And Husam Zomlot is the head of the Palestinian Mission to the UK, here in London. Our conversations were broad in their scope, addressing claims of genocide, hostages, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the position of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, relations with the US, and prospects for peace and a lasting settlement. Both men expressed strong and opposing views, but did so through conversation rather than a shouting match. And that's the intent of my show, to equip you, our viewers and listeners, with information from which you can make your own conclusions. We'll start in the UK with Ambassador Zomlot. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Do you see any light on the horizon for Gaza, or are you expecting the Israeli military action to continue for notably longer?
Israel wants to, and many commentators are saying they don't understand what is the exact Israeli aim, goal, and I think the Israelis have a goal, and the goal has been executed, unfortunately, which is the complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Look what is happening. They have completely destroyed 70% of the Gaza housing stock. They have destroyed all of our infrastructure there, civil infrastructure. They have destroyed 370 schools, all of Gaza's universities, most of Gaza's hospitals. This is a very well crafted, implemented, executed plan. A plan to make Gaza lifeless, unlivable, and to push people, displace people to the south, waiting for a moment for that mass expulsion they have done 75 years ago, the Nakba. Israel has a plan, and the world is watching, and everybody is wondering what they're doing. They're doing what they want to do.
When you ask Israeli representatives, their answer is that their goal is to defeat Hamas totally, and also to get the release of their hostages, the Israelis held there. The situation is becoming a little more complicated as Hezbollah and Houthi rebels in Yemen seem to be mobilizing more in apparent solidarity with the situation of the Palestinians in Gaza. What danger is there, in your opinion, of this spreading to a much wider regional conflict?
It's a huge danger, and it's happening. Again, Netanyahu and the government of Israel is dragging the whole region. They are trying to, and provoking the situation in the West Bank, as we just said. They are provoking the Lebanese side, and you are following the bombardment. The Syrian side, you are following the Israeli bombardment. Now Iraq is engaged. Now Yemen is engaged. So this is becoming regional. And the key constant factor between all those in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the region, is Netanyahu's insistence to drag the West into his immoral wars, so he stays in government, and so he is the one who is waging a war. His calculation is, so long as the war continues, so long as the war grows, he will continue being the prime minister. And this man has become the most dangerous human being on earth on global peace and security.
I'll get on to Benjamin Netanyahu in a moment, but deep down, what was your reaction when you heard what happened on the 7th of October last year in Israel?
Deep down, I thought that, Israel is going to instrumentalize that moment to finish off what they started in 1948. Deep down, the only thing that I was fearing is a second Nakba. Deep down, I thought that given what Israel is capable of, and given how its backers, including the US and the UK and the West, are going to behave, I thought that would be a moment for Israel to actually do what it does. And unfortunately, a big part of my fear, of my nightmare, has been unfolding in front of my own eyes and in front of my own family's eyes. And actually, big part of my own family has been killed since the 7th of October. I think from my own extended family, more than 100, and because of the cut in the communications, we don't even have a final number. Most of their houses have been destroyed, and therefore, that is the moment. However, we have been saying very clearly, that Israel has no right to self-defense so far as it is an occupation. Occupiers do not have the right to self-defense. Occupiers oppress. The only party that has a right to self-defense is the occupied, the colonized, the besieged. That's us. And therefore, all act of aggression starts with the occupation. The state of occupation is an act of aggression in itself. We are not confused there. And we reject all the media attempts and the global attempts that you may have followed to frame us and put us in a certain direction. We are the victims here. Also, the Palestinian people have been at it for a long time. This is a people struggle that has lasted for 100 years. for liberation, for freedom, for dignity, for a state of our own, and therefore we don't want to have a history started on the 7th of October, nor we want history to end there. It's part of that long journey, and the key aspect of that moment is that no one can bypass the Palestinian issue. That's a key aspect. The second key aspect is you must resolve this, not manage it.
Did you have any clue about October the 7th, or could you have conceived that Palestinians could take such extreme action in Israel in such a way?
No, I didn't.
You described the extent to which Gaza has been destroyed in terms of infrastructure, and of course we know there's a huge death toll. Could Gaza ever be the same again?
Yes, yes, and Gaza is so resilient, and Palestine is so resilient, and you know, we will recover. We will recover and we will rise. This is not the first time. This is not the first time, but you have a very exceptional situation of people that have gone through so many traumas and have developed together a sense of togetherness and a sense of unity and a sense of survivability. And we are equipped with roots and history and traditions and norms and sense of solidarity together that allow us to come back and to thrive. And you know, we use this example, you know, Jesus Christ was born in Palestine, so we have an experience with resurrection ourselves. So Gaza will resurrect, Palestine will resurrect.
What about the generations of children and young people now who've witnessed what they've seen in Gaza, and of course Palestinians outside the area who also have witnessed it close, uphand with families and so on? What's going to happen to their mindset, their ideology now going forward? Could they actually think of a peaceful situation?
The biggest trauma a child could ever go through is what is happening to the Palestinian children. Remember the UN Secretary General first statement that Gaza has become a graveyard for children, and this is very accurate. More than 10,000 Palestinian children have been slaughtered in Gaza only in the last 3 months. This is the highest number of children in any conflict, the highest number of journalists in any conflict since record began, the highest number of doctors and medical staff, the highest number of aid workers, UN workers. What is happening cannot be described by words. However, you know, I am the son of the first Nakba because my parents were the ones who were ethnically cleansed. And my parents have really managed to insulate me and my generation and really bring the best out of us. Play on the love, not the hate. And they invested so heavily, whatever left of them, because Israel kicked them out of their homes and farms and properties. They had very little, but that very little was invested in our education, in our ability to understand who we are. And look at me, I was born in a refugee camp to the very south of Gaza, by the way, in Rafah, called Shabura refugee camp. I believe the current parents in Gaza and in Palestine will do the same with the new generation. We will teach our children love to their people and to their culture and to their history, and love to their future. And we will make sure that trauma will not get to them.
But they would also have to teach them to live with the Israelis in peace.
Yes, well, we have to teach them to live in dignity. And if that dignity means that Israel has quitted its occupation and ended its occupation, colonization, besiegement, apartheid imposed on our people, on our children, if they have an equal life like everybody else, they will live in peace. But if they don't, they shall be also part of our long history of resistance and struggle. This is a legitimate struggle, but struggle not based on hate, struggle based on love. The love of who we are and the love for what we must be. And therefore, I think what the previous generations have done will happen again, because many people are asking the question, what will happen to these children? How they will grow up? They will grow up protected. This is a society, the Palestinian society is capable to embrace their generations. I was embraced by a generation that lost everything, and I believe the next generation will be embraced and protected.
Now, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been for so long seen as a kind of bulletproof politician. He has survived at the top of Israeli politics for so long, but now people are talking about cracks in his own system and that Israelis themselves don't see a future with him. What would Israel be like without Netanyahu, in your opinion?
Not much different. Because to really reduce the whole thing into a Netanyahu is to reduce our history into a one person. We have structural issues with Israel. The Israeli public has been shifting right and right-wing and more right-extreme, and look at the last government. And in the last so many years, the Israeli public has managed to decouple the issues that has to do with the Palestinians, as if we don't exist, as if we are the biggest elephant in the room. They know we exist, they know they are oppressing us, they know their military occupation and colonial expansion and besiegement and apartheid, but yet it doesn't exist. Remember the hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking off to the streets just prior to the 7th of October, protesting Netanyahu. You had a huge amount of, over a long period of time, of people in Israel protesting Netanyahu. None of them made the link with the occupation. When in fact, what Netanyahu was doing in that so-called judicial reform, he was trying to solidify the settlement movement, because the Ben Gvir and Smotrich are representatives of the settlement movement. And in effect, many people were saying in the last few years that Israel is going to annex the settlements. In effect, what has happened, it's the settlements, the illegal colonial settlements in the occupied territory, that has annexed Israel. It's not Israel that annexed the settlement, it's the settlement that was about to annex Israel. Yet the Israeli public has not made the link. Complete isolation of the illegalities and the brutalities and the atrocities that are committed by their government. So there is a lot of work to be done to change that. This is not gonna change because you have a new guy in the Israeli, cabinet or a prime minister. You have got to change the dynamics in which the Israeli public realizes that they cannot keep at it. They cannot go on. They cannot have the cake and eat it too.
Now, I know you believe that the media, to a large degree, is responsible for much of the anti-Palestinian rhetoric. You say it has defiled the Palestinian cause, desecrated the Palestinian struggle, and essentially legitimized Israel's actions. Why do you feel the media has this agenda?
Well, it's a very long experience with mainstream Western media, particularly. They have for a long time, decades, put us in the wrong framework. We were always put in the framework of violence and terrorism, when in fact violence and terrorism has been exercised against us from the beginning. We lost 2/3 of our nation in 1948 when the UK was still in a state of control of Palestine, when colonial Britain. So violence has been exercised and terrorism against us. And in that framework, they always want to blame you. So the start of the conversation, do you condemn yourself? When in fact, the atrocities that have been committed by Israel all these years, Israeli officials, ambassadors, have never asked that question. Why? We pause here. Why? When Israel has killed just the last 3 months, more than 30,000 Palestinians, 70% of whom are children and women. You know why? Because some of the mainstream media does really consider Palestinian lives not to matter the same. And once they put you in that whole framework, then it is a dispute between almost two equal parties. So you've done a mistake, they've done a mistake. Israel might be disproportionate, but in the end, the Palestinians are the aggressors, not Israel. I mean, this is a twist of the whole facts upside down. And I could go on. Look at your colleagues in the Western media. They strip the whole thing of context. As if history began on the 7th of October. History began 106 years ago here in this capital, in this city. The Balfour Declaration that stripped us, our peoplehood and our statehood, and turned us into an un-Jewish minorities. So history is long, and media is guilty of always playing sensational and primarily following the cue from the Israeli narrative.
But now the media is seeing what's happening in Gaza over such a period of time. It feels, to a lot of people, it feels like there's a turning point. Do you think this is a chance for rehumanizing Palestinians, since so many people say they've been dehumanized? It
is, and I see the turning point, and I see the change, especially in the last few weeks and months. You're right, and I see the change in the approach, and I see the change in the tone. But it's not enough. We still have many challenges and many hurdles to go. We still hear things that are completely dehumanizing the Palestinian people. When I am invited to studios, it's primarily when Israelis are harmed. But when Palestinians are harmed in big numbers, they never call us for interviews. So you see the anti-Palestinian racism sometimes. Why? Our blood is not of the same value? Why? We are children of a lesser God, but the change is happening. The public opinion is changing. Social media is helping. The information is being portrayed. And I think social media is a main reason why mainstream media is now having to adapt itself to the truth, because it has been exposed, particularly in the first few days and weeks of Israel's aggression. I mean, headlines, 40 Israeli babies beheaded. Headlines in the Times here and all these newspapers. Headlines and questioning all Palestinian representatives about many incidents that have proven to be just lies. And look, compare in the Western media when you have an Israeli official or spokesperson and a Palestinian. There it's an interview and a conversation. Here it's interrogation with Palestinians. They interrogate us rather than they want to really, really listen. I'm not generalizing. Things are changing. There are many Western journalists who are really noble, true to their mission, which is the truth. That's the mission of journalism, portraying, reflecting the truth. There are many of those, and I think they are becoming even more and more.
Well, of course, that's why I think this is important we have a conversation rather than an argument.
Yes.
Because I do want to get everyone's perspective on this. Now, many people have been asking, though, why is it so hard in the USA, the UK, in the West in general, perhaps, to challenge Israel? What makes it so hard to challenge Israel's policies and the actions it takes? What's your take on that?
Israel has managed to mix and conflate three things together. First is what is Jewish, with what is Zionist, and with what is Israeli. So if you criticize Israeli policies, you will be immediately anti-Semitic. So this conflation have caused a great deal of stifling the debate and scaring everybody to engage in a conversation about Israel's policy, not Israel's identity. It is not the identity of our oppressors that is at stake here. It is the fact of our oppression. So it's ridiculous to assume, Riz, that had our oppressors not being Jewish, we would have been okay with it. If our oppressors were Scottish or our oppressors would have been from anywhere else, we would have been okay. But only because they're Jewish. No, because they are occupiers, because they are colonizers, because they are besiegers, regardless of their faith, regardless of their identity and what have you. I'm telling you all this conversation because the West has turned Israel into the most toxic issue to discuss. And that's how you have politicians here in the UK who want to ban demonstrations, ban the Palestinian flag, calling these millions of people the marches of hate, remember? And then you have the push by the people. So the West has been unable to deal with Israel in an ordinary, normal way, equal to all other states.
I know you also believe that the US has now lost its role as the main mediator, that it's lost that monopoly it had on the peace process, as you put it. So what sort of window does this create for other nations to come in and play a role? And which nations would you believe might be, well, in your opinion, more fair play it?
Well, to be very practical, we will always need the US. The question is, how do you need the US? And to have the US to be the sole arbitrator, the sole mediator, is a model that has been tried for more than 30 years and it has failed. This model has to end. We need everybody. South Africa has a role. Africa has a role. Asia has a role. The world has a role. And there are many countries who are way more committed to the principles of international law. And what South Africa did was such an example of a responsible state that takes international law seriously.
So South Africa did go to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, to challenge what Israel is doing. The verdict was kind of a soft slap on the wrist for Israel. What was your take on what actually happened?
It was much more than a slap. This is very serious. Nothing is worse than being accused of genocide. That's the epitome of crimes. That's the mother of all crimes.
Israel wasn't accused of genocide. You were just told not to engage in genocide. Isn't that correct?
No. What the court was clear about is that there are two tracks here. There is the provisional measures whereby they have ordered Israel to stop killing Palestinians, to stop preventing aid and humanitarian assistance from arriving, to stop tampering with evidence of genocide, to stop, and all the list, and to report back to the court in 1 month. That's the first part. So the first part is effectively ceasefire. You have to stop. But the second part is that the court has ruled that the case against Israel of genocide is plausible, and therefore the court have officially accepted that Israel is now on trial for genocide. This is not a slap on the wrist. This is the first and the most significant attempt at accountability.
The UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, is going through a very difficult time now, ever since Israel released information that 12 of the UNRWA members were involved in the 7th of October attacks on Israel. As a result, a lot of the top donors to UNRWA have actually withdrawn their funding, despite the fact the UN Secretary General asked them to keep supporting UNRWA. US, Canada, UK, all have pulled out the funding. What's that going to do to Palestinians who are probably more dependent than ever on the UNRWA Relief Agency work?
There couldn't be anything worse than that very counterproductive decision by a few countries, Western countries, to suspend funding to UNRWA at this point in time. UNRWA is a lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees. So for some governments to suspend based on allegations of few individuals, and still the UN is investigating these allegations, and engage in collective punishment of an organization that is a UN organization that has 30,000 employees because of a handful. They're talking about, in effect, 10 of them, is really beyond any comprehension. This is not policy, this is revenge. And it's also in light of Israel's insistence and work for years to demolish this organization, because some Israeli officials claim that UNRWA perpetuates the right of return. Well, UNRWA does not perpetuate the right of return. And let me say something, Yani. I was educated by UNRWA.
I was going to say, you were actually born in an UNRWA-run camp, yeah.
I was educated by UNRWA, provided for by UNRWA. UNRWA gave Palestinian children and gave Palestinian people a very good path to life and to the future. So cutting that is actually playing in the hands of extremism, playing in the hands of the unknown for the future, playing in the hands of your question earlier, what will happen to these children. This is a very ill-advised decision, and I call through your program for these governments to immediately reconsider such a decision.
Ambassador, I also know you don't like the idea of a two-state solution. Explain that logic.
Because it gives the impression that there are no states and then we need to create two states. There is already a state existing, that is Israel, and that state is occupying another state that is existing but in the UN and in the recognition of the international community and in our rights. So it's a situation of ending occupation of one state to the other state. That's the actual conversation, and also it gives the image of some sort of parity and some sort of symmetry. The two-state solution. Another term, a process. I mean, this has become really a term that no Palestinian like, because it means the buying of time and the throwing of the can down the road. And the
as in peace process.
Yeah, peace processes. It has become more about the process than it is about peace. So the two-state solution misses the point that there is an occupier and an occupied.
So what is the alternative?
Ending occupation. That's the term.
What sort of state do you see for the Palestinian people then?
You will see a very prosperous state, and you will see a state that will be able to provide for its people and also be a bridge between East and West, as once we were. You have a special society, one of the most educated in the world. You know very well, Riz, wherever Palestinians go, they help build other countries. I think, wherever I go, I meet Palestinian genius professors here in the UK, in the US when I was ambassador. You will be amazed. You will be amazed the level of professionalism, education. Palestine has one of the highest PhD per capita graduates worldwide. Some 20 years ago, I think it was the highest in per capita basis. This is a nation that is capable to govern itself. This is a nation that is capable to build itself. And this is a nation that is capable to develop a state that is that is a source of stability and a source of security.
At a personal level, for someone like you, born in a refugee camp, knowing nothing but Israeli occupation and the lifestyle that the people have had to go through, could you live in peace with Israel?
Yes, of course. The problem is not, can I live in peace with Israel? What I can tell you, I cannot live with Israel's occupation. I cannot live with Israel's colonization. I cannot live with Israel's racism. I cannot live with Israel's supremacy. I cannot live with this sheer hatred and dehumanization. They don't see us as equal human beings. The first day of peace is the first day of the end of occupation. That's why let's not talk about two-state solution. Let's talk about ending the oppression and ending the occupation. And then, there will be a state, naturally, a Palestinian state, sovereign. That state will engage with Israel. Then negotiations began. Not before. You don't negotiate your freedom out of occupation. You don't negotiate your equal rights out of occupation. You don't. You snatch your rights. You acquire your rights via international support and via Israeli acceptance that they have to end their oppression. Once that happens, then you negotiate, and then you talk about two processes, and you talk about dialogue and all that. Dialogue to decide the nature of the relationship between the two states, but not the nature of the state.
Now, in terms of self-determination, critics of the Palestinian leadership say it hasn't done a lot in the last couple of decades for the Palestinian people. How do you answer those critics? Of course, there's the huge division between Fatah and Hamas, and that criticism of Fatah was considered to be one of the factors that brought Hamas to power in Gaza anyway.
It's very legitimate. Criticisms are legitimate by the Palestinian people, and it's their right to assess and to review what has happened.
What do you feel about that?
I think the Palestinian people are united as a people. And look, throughout our history,
what about the leadership?
there is no division among the people because we have one identity, we have one goal, and we have one oppressor. Remember, Israeli bullets does not distinguish between Fatah and Hamas, does not distinguish between Gaza and the West Bank. So it's also, we are united by our oppressor and we are united by our national goal. We have also national institutions. Not one Palestinian challenges the legitimacy of the PLO. Every Palestinian realizes and calls for and accepts that the PLO is the umbrella, is the address, the Palestinian national and political address for the Palestinian people. But many Palestinians want to see a reformed PLO. That's a different conversation. It's not about the idea of a PLO, the institution of the PLO, the structure of the PLO. It's about, renewal and elections and all that.
There's also all the criticism that a lot of the money, the leadership has billions, that a lot of the money gets siphoned off.
Well,
so those have to be addressed as well.
Well, there is the perception and there is the reality, and corruption is a plague, and it's plaguing everybody, and we must make sure that we are zero tolerant with corruption, because a nation seeking liberation should be absolutely white in terms of that. But who's perfect? I mean, Netanyahu himself is about to go to court for that. The issue is, do you have legitimate institutions? Fatah and Hamas is a different matter. Fatah and Hamas are political parties, movements, and Fatah is the founder of the Palestine National Movement and the pillar of the PLO. And I believe the PLO doors are open for Hamas and all other political parties to be part of the Palestinian legitimacy based on the Palestinian legitimate commitments and political program.
I understand it's not in your interest to highlight any divisions, of course, because it's the unity you want to promote. But could there be any peaceful resolution now, considering what's happened between Israel and Hamas as such, if Hamas continues to exist?
You think Hamas will not continue to exist? I mean, Hamas is not just its military wing. Hamas is also an idea. And can you bomb ideas out of existence? I mean, this whole Israeli talk and some of their backers is really non-policy. It's apolitical and apolicy. So Hamas is part and parcel of the Palestinian national, political, and social fabric. That's a fact. We did not import them from somewhere. They are us. They are part of us. We disagree with them. And they are not part of our political system. And one day they will have to be part of the political system based on a consensus and agreement among Palestinians. A way to agree, how do we disagree? But we have to agree on how, on the ship, the national ship, the sailing destination, the final destination, the liberation, and who's the captain. And we have to accept that there is no one party that takes the Palestinian people to either peace or war alone.
Ambassador, considering what's happened in the past 4 months or so, being realistic, what sort of future do you think Palestinians can expect in the next few years? Do you expect any real change?
I think there will be a change. And I think the change has already started, and started a few years back. And look what has happened. And now I think the movement that is being built up in the world is real movement. And I participate in many of these demos. I speak in these big demos, massive marches. It's of all colors, all religions. It's such a sense of unity. You know what, Riz? I even feel sometimes of late, families come, mothers and babies, in a festive mood. They are not only supporting Palestine, they are celebrating their humanity. Really, that's what I see. And I interact with them. They are celebrating who they are. They are celebrating that here we are. We are principled. We are against the Israeli actions. We are against the Israeli war. We are with the Palestinian rights. I think this has the making of a movement, global movement, millions, masses, that would do exactly as they did with South Africa. The anti-apartheid movement will go all the way to suck oxygen out of the occupation, out of the settlements, out of the colonization, to make sure that all this will collapse as did apartheid South Africa, and make sure that our prisoners will be released and the state of Palestine will be freed, and the future will be absolutely shaped by the very, very universal values that connect a British to a Palestinian, to a Pakistani, to a South African. And I think this is a moment when the people of the world are saying enough. We are going to protect our values. This is not the values of few politicians. We will protect our system. We will support the ICJ. I am hopeful that this is a turning moment, and I am aware how much work that needs to be done, but I am also aware of the opportunity.
Ambassador Husam Zomlot, thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan in London. In part one of the show, I spoke with Husam Zomlot, the head of the Palestinian Mission to the UK. In part two, we'll hear the views of Israel's Acting Consul General, Aviv Ezra, in New York. Our conversation was recorded before the International Court of Justice made its provisional ruling on South Africa's claim that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza and the demand for an immediate ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed the accusation as outrageous and said Israel would continue to defend itself while acting under international law. The ICJ called on Israel to do everything in its power to prevent acts of genocide and to allow humanitarian aid into the enclave, but did not demand an immediate ceasefire. The judges also called for the release of all Israeli hostages taken by Hamas on October the 7th. The court in The Hague has no power to enforce its rulings. Consul General, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everyone knows that Israel has a very special relationship with the USA, but seeing what's been going on and the tensions that have occurred, you yourself specialized, since you joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel in 1999, you specialized in US-Israel relations. At what stage is it now? Is that special relationship cracking in any way?
The partnership between Israel and the United States is a core pillar of Israel's defense strategy. So the fact that the United States is a strategic partner of Israel is one of our pillars of our security. And as you mentioned correctly, I've been dealing with this. I'm a career diplomat. I've been doing this for almost 25 years with a specific focus on the US-Israel bilateral relationship. I would say proud even and grateful, Israel is, that the United States, since October 7th, specifically from day one, stood firmly behind Israel on the fact that Israel has the right to defend itself, but also the duty to defend itself. You've seen President Biden not only talk the talk, but rather walk the walk. You've seen the deployment of U.S. Air Force carriers and groups to the region, day 2, day 3. You have seen the support of the UN Security Council. You have seen the support within the United States. You have seen the ongoing consultation between Israel and the United States. And I think, by the way, I traveled to Washington, D.C. There was a rally that happened in Washington, D.C. with more than 300,000 supporters of Israel, but that was not what really struck me. What really struck me is that on the stage, you had the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Speaker Johnson, next to Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader of the House, next to Senator Schumer, the majority leader of the Senate, and the Republican leadership. All four of them that don't agree on anything stood firm together in support of Israel.
Everyone expected this campaign by Israel in Gaza to be much quicker. And as it's protracted, there seems to be more protests by the public in America against the pictures they're seeing coming out of Gaza. We're seeing even President Biden pulling away a little bit. So I'm wondering if that stress is starting to show in the relationship.
Well, first of all, the length of the military campaign, which of course the goals are A, to bring back our hostages, and we could talk about that further in a second, and B, to make sure that we are eradicating the threat against Israel, is a lengthy one because we are doing our best to do two things. One, to make sure that our forces are not in harm's way, but most importantly, we want to make sure that innocent civilians are not hurt. So yes, it's a lengthy campaign. We're not, God forbid, carpet bombing. That could end in 2 minutes. That's not the issue. It's very long because we are focused on making sure that we're not. But you're right. It has an effect coming back from many friends of ours that on the one hand allow us the time to do it correctly in a manner that will minimize the casualties, but on the other hand, the understanding that there's a clock ticking. There are people that are suffering in Israel, there are people suffering in the Gaza Strip, and we need to make sure that we minimize as much as possible.
Are you surprised it's gone on this long? It seems Hamas is quite resilient.
I would say Hamas surprised us in many manners. Of course, surprised us on October 7th, but also surprised us in their in how much ammunition they gathered, in their tunnel systems. We were expecting less than 50% of what they had. They had like 2 times, maybe 3 times of what we had. They're very smart. and we should not underestimate this enemy. And I would say more than that, maybe you'll touch upon it down the road in the interview, but Hamas is just a proxy. It's just a proxy of additional threats around Israel, including in the northern part of Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah, including in the southern part, vis-a-vis the Houthis that are, of course, threatening the shipping lines, and of course the militias in Iraq and in Syria, and all of these strings are attached back to Tehran. And we need to zoom out and not only focus on the immediate, but also on the important. And the important issue is that there is a force that has been for years destabilizing the region and manufacturing these proxies, arming them, budgeting them, and creating a huge threat on the stabilization of the world.
So, Consul General, doesn't that basically negate or contradict this idea of wiping out Hamas? If there is a puppet master, and as you say it's Iran that's pulling the strings, wiping out Hamas doesn't really end the problem. And is it actually possible to take out Hamas altogether? I mean, it's so integrated into the people there. It's become part of the society.
So I think it's a very good point. The answer to that question is that Hamas is not the only problem. Hamas is the symptom that we see at the end of the day. And if we, for many years, have kicked the can down the road and saying, look, Hamas, they will maybe come around and they will progress as a third millennium governing force, we know that this is not the case. The same thing goes with Hezbollah in the north, and the same thing goes specifically to Iran and Tehran. If we kick the can down the road and would not pressure Tehran, it doesn't have to be militarily, it could be diplomatically, it could be economically, it could be various other means. If the world does not wake up and smell the coffee and push Iran, Tehran, specifically the regime, of course, I'm not talking about the population, and making sure that they will stop destabilizing the region through their proxies and sometimes even directly, we, the free world, are going to face our October 7th. Our October 7th was vis-a-vis Hamas, but the world October 7th vis-a-vis Iran could be much larger, and I urge the free world and I caution the free world to pay attention to that and not do our mistake, which is kicking the can down the road.
One of the key issues that has come up is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that he doesn't accept a two-state solution anymore. And of course, President Biden has reacted to that, saying this is not acceptable. What do you feel is going to be the outcome of this kind of opposition now?
I think the Prime Minister's definition is very clear. We would agree to the Palestinians 100% governing themselves with 0% ability to threaten us. Now, all the rest is terminology. If you want to call it a Palestinian state, what do you call it, whatever you want to call it. 100% of their ability to control themselves, to control their healthcare system, their education system, anything apart from the fact that they will have even 1% the ability to threaten us. So that goes back to what we have discussed, demilitarized and de-radicalized. As far as we're concerned, we don't want to govern Gaza. We didn't want to be there. We unilaterally disengaged from Gaza in 2005. We did not have an intention to go back. We would love them meaning the free world involved in it, the moderate Arab countries involved in it, the Palestinian representatives involved in it, governing 100% of their capabilities with 0% the ability to threaten us.
So, but if not a two-state solution, then what?
Once again, it's about terminology. If it's a two-state solution, if it's any other solution, if it falls in the criteria of Hamas not in power, Israel not controlling their life, demilitarization and de-radicalization, these four criteria, I think anything is possible. Every solution is possible.
How is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu coping with the backlash he's faced for what was seen as intelligence failure over that attack? Obviously now the situation with the hostages still ongoing. How is he handling that?
You know, October 7th was a wake-up call for Israelis. We were thinking that we had it all going in terms of intelligence, that we knew what things that are happening. We had a certain strategy of trying to develop a relationship to enhance economic development, economic incentives. And maybe we were somewhat kicking the can down the road in terms of the threat that was evolving on the other side. But October 7th was a wake-up call. We cannot put it under the rug. There was an intelligence failure, there was an operational failure, there was a response time failure. This is pretty clear to everybody, including the Prime Minister. But what's amazing is that this is not the first time that it happened. 50 years to the date, you remember, and your viewers will sure remember, 1973 Yom Kippur War, which we had a similar kind of a challenge. At that time, there was a COI, a Committee of Inquiry, or Commission of Inquiry, that had to, after the war, dive in, dig in, understand the failures, and learn from it. And of course, those who need to take responsibility in the Yom Kippur War, it went all the way up to the Prime Minister.
In terms of wake-up call, obviously, in those 50 years, little change for Palestinians. Perhaps things got worse for them. Is it also a wake-up call in the fact there has been no advance in the peace process, that something needs to change fundamentally in the relationship?
It's a great question. I would say the following. Israel is yearning for peace. We have proved it. We have already signed a peace accord with Egypt. We have signed a peace accord with Jordan. We have signed a peace accord with Abraham Accord, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and many others. So we strive for peace. This is our interest, and we are willing to pay a price. In the case of Egypt, we have pulled out all of our settlements. We have done the same when other adjustment had to be done in other places. We are willing to pay the price. But the point is that we want to make sure that the case of the Palestinians, which they never jumped into the wagon of peace, is that we make it in a manner that will be sustainable. And the way to do it is to see that we have somebody on the other side that is not only willing to commit to that, but also capable. 2005 was a superb opportunity to really examine the opportunity to move forward. We unilaterally disengaged from the Gaza Strip because it was always, about maybe the occupation is the reason, etc. There was no occupation in 2005 in the Gaza Strip. There were no settlements, there were no soldiers. We pulled out our cemeteries and our kindergarten. And we were promised by the US, by the UN, by the EU, that we will see the new Singapore of the Middle East in Gaza. And guess what? October 7th blew up in our face, because they were building and busy doing other things, not focusing on their economy, not focusing on their population and academia or what have you. They were focused on building an underneath Gaza that has one goal for it, which is to go after innocent civilians. Therefore, we still yearn for peace. We still believe in peace, but we need to do it in a manner that does not threaten our innocent civilians.
Realistically, though, could it be the new Singapore if you still have checkpoints, if Israel still controls so much of the life of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip?
It could be the next Singapore of the Middle East if the goal and the genuine belief is that we're going towards building the new Singapore of the Middle East. So two elements, two criteria that are crucial in matter of building the new Singapore of the Middle East is to make sure that the Gaza Strip is demilitarized, because if they're building a new Singapore of the Middle East, they don't have to have a military, and de-radicalized. We have to stop the hatred. We have to stop the incitement. I lived in places in the Arab world, and I can tell you that if you teach, children are not born hateful. So if you teach them in the education system, or through the media, or through the mosques that they have to kill Jews, at the end of the day, when there's a gun, it will shoot in the next years.
But Consul General, there's also the issue that what's going on now is only going to build thousands more Hamas, or those who share Hamas's ideology, in terms of fighters. The generation of young people now who've seen what's going on, it's only going to exacerbate the situation, surely.
We are now in the Gaza Strip. Many years, 18 years, we were outside of the Gaza Strip. We were in denial because we were thinking that the other side is busy doing other things. And now that we're inside and our units are there, what they report back is that every second institute, whether it's a hospital or a mosque or a classroom or a kindergarten or a house, every second institution or house has ammunition in it, incitement material in it. This was not something which was just focused on a specific organization. This was systematically controlled by Hamas with the entire Gaza Strip. Now, we believe in change. I mean, look, UAE, for example, their education system doesn't have any incitement against Israel. Israelis are not flawless, they have their flaws, but they're human beings like you and I. Once you change that mode, you can really create and build a peace. If you do not change it, you do not de-radicalize, and you do not demilitarize, we can't go forward.
There are many who would argue, of course, the situation didn't necessarily allow an easy change in Gaza because of the circumstances. But let me get on to the idea that you have, as you've mentioned, these relationships in the Arab world now. It seemed that Israel was just about to sign a peace accord with Saudi Arabia, and then October the 7th happened. Where does that situation stand now?
October 7th was not just about killing Israelis and killing Jews. It was also about killing the Israeli spirit. That's why they broadcasted all the atrocities, raping, burning of families, decapitating babies. Most murderers would not film themselves and then broadcast it, but they did that. So it's not just killing Israelis, it's not just killing the spirit of Israel, but it's what you said, it's about killing the peace, because we were on the verge of moving forward. Now, we believe that it's still doable, and that's where there's a significant role for the moderate Arab world. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt is playing a critical role, and of course a critical friend of the State of Israel, in bringing a coalition of moderate Arab world, the Western world, and Israel to have a better future for the Palestinians without Hamas. Hamas is not a good future for the Palestinian friends of ours, and we are telling it constantly to our Palestinian friends.
I'm curious, based on your knowledge of how your country operates, had Hamas gone in and not committed any of these atrocities you described, had it just been a case of taking hostages, how would the action by Israel have been any different?
Look, Israel's military is a reserves military. So my son, who is 17 years old now, will join the military because there's a draft at the age of 18, and then at the age of 21, he finishes his military and he will join back again as a reserves unit. So at the end of the day, if there will be an abduction of, and October 7th, by the way, was focused on civilians, was focused on children, was focused on elderly, was focused on women. They raped women. They kidnapped a 1-year-old baby. Who the hell takes a POW, a prisoner of war, a 1-year-old baby? But had they not done it, just had abducted the hostages that are soldiers, we have our values because we cherish life, and we will not leave any soldier back in the dungeons of Hamas. And you know the story of Gilad Shalit. They have abducted one soldier, and some would say wrongly, we released more than 1,000 terrorist murderers in return to bringing him back home. Do you know who was one of the 1,000 murderers? One of them was Yahya Sinwar, that came back to the Gaza Strip and today committed these atrocities. So I don't envy the decision makers in Israel, but the values of Israel is that we cherish life. The other side, unfortunately, cherishes death.
One of the difficulties is for the world, especially now with media the way it is, each side has its own version of the story. You know, some would say propaganda, some would say just their own version. How easy is it to get the facts, do you think, out of the stories now, the way things are?
You know, it's a very good point that you're raising. Today, the attention span of everyone, especially the young generation, is very short. So the mechanism is usually through the social media. It should be a very small fraction of 15-second segments. And you and I know that unless you have an opportunity to have a back and forth of half an hour like this amazing show, you cannot pass in 15 seconds any real discussion and understanding of the complexities of the issues. And you know, the Jewish people, you're talking about 2,000, 3,000 years. That's more complex than 15-second segments on TikTok. Therefore, I think one of the challenges that we have is that there's the truth, and there's additional 4 or 5 additional narratives that are totally not connected to reality, but they could be believed in the same manner of reality. In this case, the other side is Hamas, and Hamas is a by the way, designated terrorist organization here in the United States that is committed for 2 things, and you have to read their charters: eradicating Israel and killing Israelis. And one last thing, for those, to your point, one last thing, to the fact that people don't read Arabic, they are not shy, and they are putting it in TikTok in English, that they would commit 10/7, October 7th again and again and again, should they have the option. So we have to listen carefully to what they're saying and not undermine it.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu said that we will chase Hamas down wherever they go, anywhere in the world. That he made very clear. They won't let anyone go. That puts forward the risk of extrajudicial killings on foreign soil and so on. There's quite a risk, and already there are international groups saying that there's the risk of Israel breaching international law by going after Hamas if they're out of the country.
You know, I don't want to go into specific details. I can tell you this. When a murderer is committing murders, and we know who he is, and we know that he's planning to do it again, so he's also a ticking bomb, I think any democratic free country will say we need to prevent it, but also make sure that that person is accountable. And I don't want to go into details of what Israel will be doing, but I can tell you that there is a commitment that anyone who murders Israelis or murders Jews would be accountable.
I want to touch on...
That's a promise. That's
I
a promise.
want to touch on the way the story has spread in these past few months. There's a lot of confusion for a lot of people when it comes to defining anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. How would you define it? Because it seems a lot of people are confused to the point where anything that's said to challenge Israel's policies is seen as anti-Semitic, which it not necessarily is.
You know, Riz, half of Israel's public opinion is against the government of Israel's policy. So anyone is allowed to go against the policies of the government of Israel. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about, and I'll give you the best example. Right here in New York, there was a campaign to try to release the babies and the women and the hostages. And there were stickers with beautiful faces of these kids. And then at a certain point, you would see people that will tear down these posters. They wouldn't tear down a poster of a lost dog, but they would tear down a poster of an Israeli baby, 10-month-old. Not because of what he did, but because of who he is. That's pure anti-Semitism. When you exclude a certain segments of the population, that is exactly the definition of anti-Semitism.
Although there is an irony that for a lot of people, they feel that Europe, Britain, in the USA, it's very hard to say anything without being labeled against Israel's actions, without being labeled anti-Semitic.
You know, I've seen a lot of demonstrations here, and I cherish the First Amendment. I cherish the freedom of speech. But I have a challenge when the freedom of speech becomes a violent attack and a genocidal attack against only one state. I'll give you another example. October 7th, the atrocities happened. October 28th, once again, the campaign started. October 8th, there was a demonstration down our consulate with the chants saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, the best case scenario is that they don't know what they're chanting. The worst case scenario is they know exactly what they're chanting, which means a genocidal, a call to eradicate the state of Israel. From the river, the Jordan River, to the seas, the Mediterranean.
A lot of history has been lost, Consul General. For so many centuries, Arabs and Jews lived in peace. Do you ever see that happening again?
A, I believe in it. B, my family, half of it comes from Iraq, and for many years they were living in peace, but they had to flee from Iraq when they were attacked by pogroms. I think the only way that we can live in peace, and this comes to element C, is through the fact that the other side understand that we are there to stay, and we are strong, and we have the ability to defend ourselves. And the proof is in the pudding. We have a peace accord with Egypt, because we know that after 73 they did not succeed to wipe us off the map, and they understood the best ways to peace. We have a peace accord with Jordan. We have the Abraham Accord. So to your question, the answer is hell yes. We already proved that it's doable. But the way to do it is through the acceptance on the other side that they are willing and they are capable of delivering on their side. And Israel, we need to compromise on its side. It's already proved that we're capable of doing it. But we're not going to do it if the other side doesn't mean it and is not playing ball and wants to kill us.
There's no denying how terrible the attacks were on October the 7th on Israel. But at a human level, as a father, How do you react? How do you feel when you see what's been happening in Gaza with the children, with the women, with people? I mean, a lot of innocent people, obviously, tens of thousands.
Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. Let me repeat it again. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. But the question is, how did we get to this situation? October 6th, we were not in a war. We were in a ceasefire. Hamas broke the ceasefire. October 8th, we understood that we need to defend ourselves. According to international law, we are entitled to defend ourselves. And we want to make sure that we're doing it in a manner that will minimize innocent civilians. So we work specifically through the international law. We waited about 20 days in which we caution the innocent civilians that we are coming. Which military does that? Second, we have secured humanitarian corridors. Third, we have secured humanitarian safe zones because we didn't want to hurt innocent civilians. The other side, Hamas, is using them as human shields. They don't care killing Israelis, that I understand, but they also don't care killing their own people. They're using them as human shields. You and I can't, it's mind-boggling. It can't dawn on us that you will hide behind a baby and shoot behind it. They're doing it. And last but not least, they have done, and this is not an assessment, this is knowledge, they have pushed back their Palestinian innocent civilians into the war zone, using them. It's just, these are war crimes across the board, and that's without even mentioning the fact that they continue shooting, even today, 10,000 rockets on Israel, which is another double war crime.
Considering the density of the population in Gaza, it's almost impossible to separate Hamas from the people, isn't it?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. We're doing, and by the way, we're not the only free democracy that has been challenged with that. Obviously, the United States had the same challenge. We're doing a much better job than many other militaries. But to tell you that it's easy, it's not easy. It's extremely difficult. And more than that, Hamas is not wearing uniform.
But that's what I'm saying in terms of human shields. They're so mixed with the people, it's almost impossible for people not to be around Hamas.
That is the challenge. That is exactly the challenge, because they're embedding themselves within the population. This is another war crime that they're committing against their own people.
A lot of people are asking, what is a proportionate response to what happened on October the 7th? What's your answer?
A proportionate response is one that takes into consideration not a tit for tat, but what could that terrorist, which kind of damage can it apply on our soul? So for example, if that terrorist, and we are calculating that all the time, we have mechanisms within the Air Force, mechanism within the military. So if that terrorist, for example, is on the way, I'll give you a theoretical example. If that terrorist is on the way to blow up a mall and will kill thousands of innocent civilians, and you know that he's a ticking bomb, and while you take him, unfortunately he's hiding behind his wife, would you take both of them out if you know that you'll prevent 3,000 people being slaughtered? The answer, at a certain point, first of all, according to international law, you're allowed to do it because it's self-defense. And B, if you cannot in any way, shape, or form prevent it otherwise, and this is what we're looking for, you'll have to pay a price. This is what's called proportionate, not tit for tat. If we were looking at tit for tat proportionally, we would have to kill 500 women, rape 300 women, decapitate 70 babies. I'm not doing that kind of a math. My math is proportionate in the sense of preventing future terrorist attacks.
When do you see this ending, sir, in your head?
When our people are released, 136 of them, and when there is no continuous threat from the Gaza Strip towards Israel. That is immediately a promise that we immediately stop the fighting. When we know that Hamas is no longer a threat to Israel, and we know that our babies and our hostages are back home. It's up to them. This is actually a misconception that many people understand. When will Israel cease fire? We will cease fire when our babies are back home and when they continue to stop to threaten us. It's pretty easy. I mean, we don't have an interest. October 6th, we were not planning to be there. We're there because we want to bring back our children and our hostages, and we want to prevent it from happening again because they want to do it again. They're not shy about it. They would say they will do it again and again and again. What would you do? What would the other free world do? By the way, in terms of magnitude, this is more than one 9/11 for us. It's 10 9/11s. But the difference is that in 9/11, right here in New York, The enemy was across the Atlantic Ocean. It was somewhere in Tora Bora, in a cave. In our case, down the road, less than 1 kilometer, 1 mile. And they are planning to come again. What will be the expectation from us?
Well, Consul General, it's a very difficult conversation, of course, and it's important to get your perspective. I thank you for your time.
I thank you for your time, and I pray for a peaceful time coming soon on all of us.
We've heard from both the Israeli and Palestinian sides in the Gaza conflict on this episode of the show. I'll continue to bring you engaging conversations on important global issues in future editions. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thank you for watching.